Shalom from Israel. It's a pleasure to be able to share this study time with you from Israel. I want to take this opportunity to let everyone know who doesn't have a place to gather and wants to be part of a group. I want to encourage you to join our network of congregations known as Casa Shalom, which are located in different cities around the world. To find out how to locate them, you should visit the website vocesdisrael.com, and there you will be able to get information. Also, if you want to receive training and feel that you could start a home group in the future, you can join our leadership training school. Once that's been said, and once you can visit the website, then we'll go straight in. In our study last week, we finished Genesis 26, and today we're starting one of the chapters. Perhaps one of the most emotionally charged within the family. This chapter will probably make many of those who are going to listen to what we have to teach today uncomfortable. And what's more, it may expose many people. And I sincerely hope that this discomfort or being exposed helps everyone to bring about a change for the better in the days to come. So let's read the entire chapter 27 of the book of Genesis all at once, and then I'll explain everything we're going to be learning today. So let's go straight to the book of Genesis chapter 27, and let's read from verse 1. It says this. It happened that when Isaac grew old and his eyes became dim, he lost his sight. He called Esau his oldest son and said to him, "My son," and he answered, "Here I am." And he said, "Look, I am old now, I do not know the day of my death. So now take your weapons, your quiver and your bow, and go out to the field and bring me some game. And make me a stew the way I like it and bring it to me, so I can eat and bless you before I die." And Rebekah was listening when Isaac spoke to Esau his son, and Esau went out to the field to hunt the game he was to bring. Then Rebekah spoke to Jacob her son, saying, "Behold, I have heard your father speaking to Esau your brother, saying, 'Bring me game and make me a stew, so that I may eat and bless you in the presence of Adonai before I die.' Now then, my son, obey me in what I command you. Go now to the flock and bring me from there 2 good young goats. I'll make your father a dish just the way he likes. And you will take them to your father, and he will eat, so that he may bless you before his death." And Jacob said to Rebekah his mother, "Look, Esau my brother is a hairy man, and I am smooth-skinned. Perhaps my father will feel me, and I will seem to him like a deceiver, and I will bring a curse upon myself and not a blessing." And his mother replied, "My son, let your curse be on me. Just obey my voice and go, bring them to me." So he went and took them and brought them to his mother, and his mother prepared a stew just the way his father liked. And Rebekah took the best clothes of Esau, her older son, which she had at home, and put them on Jacob, her younger son. And she covered his hands and the smooth part of his neck with the skins of the young goats. And she put the savory food and the bread she had prepared into the hands of Jacob, her son. Then he went to his father and said, "My father." And Isaac answered, "Here I am. Who are you, my son?" And Jacob said to his father, "I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Now arise, sit and eat of my game, so that you may bless me." Then Isaac said to his son, "How is it that you found it so quickly, my son?" And he answered, "Because the Lord your God brought it to me." And Isaac said to Jacob, "Come near now, and I will feel you, my son, to know whether you are my son Esau or not." And Jacob came near to his father Isaac, who felt him and said, "The voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau." And he did not recognize him because his hands were hairy like Esau's hands. And he blessed him and said, "Are you my son Esau?" And Jacob answered, "I am." He also said, "Bring it to me, and I will eat of my son's game, so that I may bless you." And Jacob came near to him, and Isaac ate. He also brought him wine, and he drank. And Isaac his father said to him, Isaac, his father, said to him, "Come near now and kiss me, my son." And Jacob came near and kissed him, and Isaac smelled the smell of his garments and blessed him, saying, "Look, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field that Adonai has blessed. May God give you the dew of heaven and the fatness of the earth and plenty of grain and wine. Let people serve you and nations bow down to you. Be lord over your brothers, and let your mother's sons bow down before you. Cursed be those who curse you, and blessed be those who bless you." And it happened that when Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, and Jacob had scarcely gone out from the presence of his father Isaac, Esau his brother came back from hunting. He also prepared a stew and brought it to his father, and said to him, "Let my father arise and eat of his son's game, so that you may bless me." Then his father Isaac said to him, "Who are you?" And he said to him, "I am your firstborn son Esau." And Isaac trembled greatly and said, "Who was it then that came here and brought game?" And he gave it to me, and I ate all of it before you came, Esau's. And I blessed him, and he will be blessed. When Esau heard his father's words, he cried out with an exceedingly loud and bitter cry. And he said to him, "Bless me too, my father." And he said, "Your brother came with deceit and took your blessing." And Esau replied, "They rightly named him Jacob and Yaakov. For he has supplanted me twice. He took my birthright, and now he has taken my blessing." And he said, "Haven't you kept a blessing for me?" Isaac answered and said to Esau, "Behold, I have made him your lord, and I have given all his brothers to him as servants, and I have provided him with grain and wine. What can I do for you now, my son?" And Esau answered his father, and Esau said to his father, "Do you have only one blessing, my father? Bless me also, my father." And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. Then Isaac, his father, spoke and said to him, "Behold, your dwelling shall be of the fatness of the earth, and of the dew of heaven from above. And by your sword you shall live, and you shall serve your brother. And it shall come to pass, when you become strong, that you will break his yoke from your neck." And Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which his father had blessed him. And he said in his heart, "The days of mourning for my father are at hand, then I will kill my brother Jacob." And the words of Esau, her elder son, were told to Rebekah. And she sent and called Jacob, her younger son, and said to him, "Behold, Esau your brother comforts himself with the thought of killing you. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice. Arise and flee to the house of Laban, my brother, in Haran. And stay with him for a few days until your brother's anger subsides. Until your brother's anger against you subsides, and he forgets what you have done to him. Then I will send for you and bring you back from there, because I would be deprived of both of you in one day." And Rebekah said to Isaac, "I am weary of my life because of the daughters of Heth. If Jacob takes a wife from the daughters of Heth, like these daughters of this land, what good is my life to me?" This is a story. Incredible. What we're going to find is that we're going to try to understand how it can help us in our daily lives. There's something dangerous that we often do without realizing it, and that's trying to negotiate with God. We know what he said, we understand his direction, but deep down we still hope he'll change his mind because our idea seems better to us. The historian and scholar Alfred Edelstein wrote a very powerful phrase. He said, "Man tempts God when he doubts what God has already made clear." And that's exactly what's happening here in Genesis chapter 27. Isaac already knew, what God had determined. God had spoken years before. The direction is very clear, but now we find an old, sick, and almost blind Isaac trying to bless Esau. And here an uncomfortable question arises. Why Isaac? Why does he insist on something when God had already spoken? Could it be excessive love for Esau, emotional preference, denial, or simply the hope that God will end up accepting Isaac's own will? Because, let's be honest, many times we do exactly the same thing. We want God to bless decisions that he never approved. We want peace, but without obedience. We want promises without surrender, and that always ends up bringing conflict. Now then, something important. Many believe that this whole story revolves around the birthright, but really, the core of the problem here isn't who was the firstborn. That was already pretty much decided. What's really happening is a struggle over the blessing, and there's a difference between the two things. In the Hebrew world, the firstborn was usually established automatically by birth. The first male child received special rights in spiritual family leadership. A double portion of the inheritance, but the father's final blessing, that was something else. It was much more emotional, more personal, more spiritual. It was the moment when the father declared destiny, favor, and future over his children. And here Isaac wants to give that main blessing to Esau. The problem is that heaven had already chosen another path. Even Esau seems to understand it later when he says, Jacob took my birthright and now also the blessing. Observe. He is distinguishing between the two, because they weren't exactly the same. The birthright was about rights. The blessing was about the legacy. And honestly, this still happens today, because many times in families, inheritances are never just about money. People interpret love through what they receive. If someone gets more, they think they were loved more. If someone else gets less, they feel like they were rejected. That was probably happening within that family as well. The impressive thing about Genesis 27 is that behind every spiritual story, there are human emotions. Favoritism, wounds, competition, fear, manipulation. And there is a completely divided family, and even so, God continues to carry out his plan in spite of all human weakness. Here, it's like the story is starting to take on much more emotional weight. And honestly, when you understand the real ages of the characters, everything changes. Because normally we imagine this scene as if Jacob and Esau were impulsive young men, almost teenagers fighting for their father's approval, but Genesis is giving us a completely different picture. Isaac was about 137 years old, and if Jacob and Esau were born when Isaac was 60, then these guys were a little over 70 years old. Think about that for a second. This isn't a teen drama. It's an entire family dragging decades of wounds, favoritism, and unresolved spiritual decisions. Isaac is old, almost blind, weak, and probably convinced that he's close to dying, so he decides to make the blessing official. But here another key character appears. Her name is Rebekah. The Bible says she hears everything. She hears that Isaac wants to bless Esau, and at that moment she decides to intervene. Now the big question is, was Rebekah defending God's plan? Or was she manipulating the circumstances because she didn't trust that God could fulfill his own word? That's a dangerous question. In fact, it's still very relevant today because many times we also believe that we need to help God. As if his will depended on our manipulation. As if heaven needed our carnal methods to fulfill eternal promises. Rebekah knew what God had said years ago, that the older would serve the younger. But instead of resting, she controls, manipulates. She pressures, comes up with a plan, and Jacob joins the conspiracy. Notice something really fascinating. Jacob never seems morally concerned about the deception. His fear isn't, this is wrong. His fear is, what if we get caught? And there we see something very human. Many times people aren't afraid to sin, rather they're afraid of the consequences of it. Then begins what is probably one of the most tense scenes in Genesis. Jacob dresses up as Esau. He wears his clothes, covers himself with goat skin to imitate his brother's hair, and enters the tent where Isaac was. The scene is impressive. Isaac hears the voice and something doesn't add up for him. The voice is Jacob's, he says, but when he touches him, feels the skins, and smells Esau's clothes, he ends up convinced. And then he pronounces the blessing. In Hebrew, we say the bracha, a Hebrew word that undoubtedly has a very powerful and deep meaning. Because it wasn't just wishing something good for someone, it was declaring destiny, future, authority, legacy. The words that Isaac speaks over Jacob are profound. May God give you the dew of heaven, the abundance of the earth, may people serve you, and may you be Lord over your brothers. Now understand something important, music. Isaac knew that Jacob had the birthright. The problem wasn't technical, the problem was emotional. Isaac still wanted to favor Esau. It was as if he was trying to lessen the impact of Jacob's calling to give more prominence to the son he loved more. And here we see a powerful lesson. Favoritism always ends up distorting justice. Isaac wanted to alter the distribution of power and wealth. He couldn't completely take away the birthright, but he could try to strip it of its substance. And honestly, this is something that continues to happen to this day. There are parents who love differently, there are divided families, there are inheritances that destroy relationships. People fighting not only for money, but for emotional validation. Because many times inheritance represents something much deeper. It represents who was truly loved. But even in the midst of all this manipulation, God's plan keeps moving forward, and that's impressive because God's purpose doesn't depend on perfect people. And now there's something even more shocking that I want to share. Jacob orchestrated this whole event. All this drama to get something that God had already said would be his. Thank you. Think about this. Thank you. He lied, manipulated, deceived, thank you, to get something that would never have been taken from him. How many times do we do exactly the same thing? Thank you. We try to anxiously bring about what God has already promised to give us. We get desperate, we try to control, we try to force doors open, we manipulate people. Why? Because we simply don't know how to wait. The wrong paths always leave marks that were obtained in the wrong way. Jacob received the blessing, yes, but he also began a life marked by consequences. Because even though the purpose was right, the method was sinful. And then Esau arrives with the prepared food. Excited, expecting to receive his father's blessing. And in that moment, Isaac understands everything. He realizes he was deceived. But he can't undo it anymore, because an officially pronounced blessing was considered irreversible. And Esau breaks down, he cries. He cries. He begs. He pleads for some blessing. And here a very important detail comes up. Esau distinguishes between the birthright and the blessing. Do you remember how we mentioned it before? He says he took away my birthright and now also the blessing. Why? Because they are two different things. And honestly, it seems that Esau was never interested in the spiritual responsibility of the firstborn. What he wanted were the benefits, the power, the wealth, the position. He wanted the crown without carrying the purpose of the calling. And that's a strategy. It's a strategy. Sorry, it's a spiritual tragedy that still exists to this day. People who want God's blessings, but not the responsibility of walking with Him. And then comes one of the saddest moments in this whole story. Esau is broken. The strong man, the hunter, the son of Isaac, was now crying in front of his dad. And he begs him, "Don't you have another blessing for me?" But Isaac had already given away the main one. Remember the bracha, the blessing was irreversible, and now what's left? It could end up being a limited blessing. A blessing marked more by survival than by abundance. And here we find something really interesting, really fascinating, you could say, because Genesis 27-39 has generated discussion for centuries. Many translations, including the one we read earlier today, say the following. They say, your dwelling will be in the fatness of the earth and in the dew of heaven. They say it sounds like Esau is also receiving prosperity. But when we read it in the Hebrew language and we look at the phrase literally, it points completely in a different direction. The idea would really be this. It says, far away, Rajak, far from the abundance of the earth and far from the dew of the sky will be your dwelling. I'm not sure you understood me this way. This changes everything, since now it's not like Jacob's blessing anymore. What we're actually seeing is a separation. Jacob receives fertility. Esau receives hardship. Jacob receives abundance. Esau receives an arid territory. And honestly, when you look at the region of Edom historically, the territory associated with Esau, that makes a lot of sense. Because Edom developed in dry, rocky, and very inhospitable areas. It's in the southern region of the Dead Sea. And it wasn't a land known for being abundant, so an uncomfortable question arises. Why, for so many years, did some interpretations soften this blessing? And here we are learning something very important. Sometimes traditions, listen carefully. Sometimes traditions are born from the human desire to resolve emotional tensions within the Bible. Because many ancient scholars felt compassion for Esau. And honestly, it's easy to understand why. Think about the story from his perspective. Even before he was born, there was already a prophetic word about him. His mother clearly favored Jacob. His brother deceived him, and the most important moment of his life ended up being destroyed. So for centuries, many have wondered, was God really cursing Esau? And that tension produced interpretations, debates, and traditions. Because human beings often try to soften what is emotionally difficult for them to accept from the scriptures. And here's a dangerous lesson. When emotion dominates interpretation, the truth begins to be distorted. That's why it's so important not to build doctrine from feelings. And here's another very interesting historical detail. A famous Jew named Rashi. To WhatsApp, thank you. A medieval figure, let's say, he began to develop a symbolic interpretation of Esau and Jacob. And he says that this happened during an extremely painful time for the Jewish people. In fact, the time he was living in was the time of the Crusades, and he says thousands of Jews were persecuted, forced to convert, or killed by groups that claimed to represent Christianity. And in this context, Rashi begins to see Esau as a representation of Rome, while Jacob represented Israel. And honestly, for someone living in that period, that emotional connection made sense, because Rome was seen as the center of religious power that persecuted the Jewish people. So Esau stopped being just a biblical character and then became a symbol. And that's where we need to be very careful, because studying historical patterns is one thing, and another very different things to turn symbolism into absolute doctrines. Throughout history, many people have used biblical figures to justify hatred, division, or religious conflicts. But the purpose of the biblical text is not to fuel resentment. It is to reveal the human condition, because when you look at Genesis 27, you really don't find perfect heroes. Isaac manipulates, Rebekah controls, Jacob deceives. Esau despises spiritual responsibilities, and yet God continues to advance his purpose. And that's what's impressive, that God's faithfulness continues, even in the midst of broken families and wrong decisions. Perhaps one of the strongest lessons here is that untreated wounds within a family can last for generations. Because this conflict between Jacob and Esau doesn't end inside the tent, the consequences will keep appearing for centuries. And here the story kind of starts to get a bit more serious, because Esau's blessing really starts to seem more like a sentence than a reward. And Isaac is practically telling him, your future will be far from abundance, far from fertility, far from comfort, far from the blessed land. And this is explaining something very important to us, Esau's reaction. Because if Esau had truly come out blessed, if he had inherited prosperity, stability, and abundance, would he really have developed such a deep hatred against Jacob? Probably not. But when you understand that Esau ends up associated with arid, difficult, and violent regions, then you understand the anger, and then we start to understand that everything has a meaning. Envy is born when someone feels that another person received what he believes he deserves. And here begins an enmity that will mark entire generations. Jacob, who will later be called Israel, and Esau, who will end up being associated with Edom. Two brothers, two paths, two completely different destinies. And this is where we need to be very careful about something. Throughout history, many have tried to directly connect modern peoples with biblical characters. Biblical characters in an absolute way. And although there are partial historical and genealogical connections between ancient peoples of the Middle East, we cannot simplify millions of modern people into rigid biblical categories. The Bible does show historical conflicts between Israel and Edom, but the main goal of the text is not to create ethnic hatred, not modern hatred. Rather, it is to show us how spiritual decisions, family wounds, and human rebellions can have consequences that last for generations. This continues to happen to this day. Families divided for decades, inherited conflicts, grudges passed down from parents to children because unhealed wounds almost always outlive those who caused them. Now then, there's something very interesting within Esau's blessing. Isaac says to him, "You will live by your sword." He is describing a life of constant struggle for Esau. Survival, conflict, violence, dependence on strength, and when it comes to strength. And when you study the history of Edom, you really find a people constantly tied to wars, aggressive trade routes, and regional tensions. But look, observe this, even within the curse there is a promise of deliverance. Isaac also declares that the day will come when Esau will break the yoke from his neck. And that happened historically. For centuries, Edom was under Israelite rule, especially during the time of King David. But later on, Edom regained independence, and here we see another biblical principle. The cycles of human power always change. No earthly kingdom lasts forever. Now the story ends in a very intense way, because Esau is not only hurt, now he wants to kill Jacob. And Rebekah knows it. So she makes an urgent decision. She sends Jacob away. But remember something. She is not telling Isaac the whole truth. She doesn't say, Jacob must escape because Esau wants to kill him. Instead, she uses another argument. She tells him that Jacob needs to leave so he doesn't marry Canaanite women like Esau did. And that directly touches on a deep concern of Isaac because Esau had already married Hittite women, and that had brought pain within the family. So Isaac agrees, and Jacob must leave his home. Now imagine the scene. No, we're not talking about an 18-year-old young man who's just starting life. Jacob was over 70 years old, and even so, he has to run away. Alone, insecure, marked by guilt, separated from his family, and entering a completely new stage of his life. And honestly, this is where Jacob's true process of transformation begins. Because up until now, Jacob had lived by manipulating circumstances. But very soon, God will begin to break that nature, because the man who deceived will now learn what it means to be deceived. The man who manipulated will live under the manipulation of others. And that's how it often works. God doesn't just correct us with words. Sometimes he allows us to experience what we have sown. Understand this not to destroy us, but to transform us. Because Jacob is still not ready to become Israel. And maybe the most important question at the end of Genesis 27. It's not what did Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob, or Esau do? The question is, what's happening today inside our own home? Because this story isn't just about an ancient family. It's about what happens when favoritism starts in a home. Comparisons, manipulations, and silent wounds. Let's pause for a moment and look at our family. Amen? And I want to ask some rhetorical questions. How are you treating your children? Are you listening to them? Are you making distinctions between one and the other? Are there wounds growing inside your home that you might not be noticing? And Isaac and Rebekah never imagined that their decisions would divide the family in this way. And many times we don't realize the damage either. Unfortunately, sometimes it's too late. So I want to advise you to use this story as a mirror. Because maybe today God doesn't just want to teach us theology. Maybe he wants to talk to us about our home. Maybe it's time to get closer again, to ask for forgiveness, to heal relationships, to stop competing within the family, and to put God back at the center of the home. Because no material blessing can replace a healthy family. Genesis 27 makes something very clear to us. Family wounds that are not healed can haunt entire generations. Allow me to close this time in prayer. And let's allow God to take control of our homes and our families. God, we thank you for this time, for this opportunity and this privilege. And we ask you, Lord, to take control of our homes, of our families. Bless our brothers, Lord, and as we study this story that perhaps in some way stirs our hearts. Because from a human perspective, a lot of injustice can be seen. But as we have come to understand, Lord, even in the midst of flaws, even in the midst of failures, even in the midst of disorganization, you keep moving forward with your plan. And we, Lord, thank you. Because you are faithful to your plan. And we ask you, Lord, for forgiveness for straying and for making all these mistakes. Lord, show us where we need to correct ourselves and where we need to straighten ourselves out. Help us not to show favoritism, but rather that we may be completely balanced, and that we may be a blessing in our homes. Lord, help my brothers, those who are on the other side. Bless them. and speak to their hearts, and may they be able to make a change, and may that change be immediate. In the name of Yeshua, we thank you, Lord. Amen. And may Adonai make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you, and may Adonai turn his face toward you and give you peace. May the Lord keep you, and may the Lord bless you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you. May he have mercy on you and grant you peace. God bless you. We'll meet again next week. Chapter 28 of the book of Genesis. If this material was a blessing to your life, share it. Share it so that other people can also be blessed.
Shalom.